My
All
cat
right.
is my cat is choosing this moment to throw things on the floor because he wants my attention.
Well, in just a minute, my cat will choose this moment to come in and demand dinner. So, I mean, it's the little things that we've learned working from home entirely and disrupting our cat's habits for the last year. While we
Yes,
wait for
yeah.
people to come in, I'm just gonna kind of get started. Hi, I'm Beth Barrett. I'm the artistic director at SIFF, and I am so thrilled to have with me here for our Documentaries Documents Roundtable discussion, Lisa Immordino Vreeland with Truman in Tennessee, an intimate conversation, and director Marilyn Agrelo from Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street, along with the producer Ellen Scherer Crafts. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your evening, especially those of you on the East Coast, Saturday night, talking about documentaries, but that's what we love to do. And we're really, really, really thrilled to have you here. So Sesame Street, Tennessee Williams, and Truman Capote are some of the most famous cultural pillars of their time, and indeed still are, with Sesame Street still on the air, and the works of Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams still being read and done on stage, and really forming new art out of what they left. So as filmmakers, representing those histories, I would love to hear how each of you sort of came to define those cultural pillars as what you wanted to investigate as documentarians. And Lisa, we'll go ahead and start with you. What drew you to Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams?
It was, anyway, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to have an all-women panel. So I feel very lucky to be spending my Saturday night with the three of you and everyone else. But it was, I guess, on my filmmaking, I've really been examining these creative forces of the 20th century. And, I had started, I was looking at really initially only Truman Capote. And because I felt that there was this kind of broken, the vision that the new generation of people have of Capote is this kind of broken down man that they're seen on talk shows. And I said, because when I'm making these films, I always want to redeem them and redefine them for a new generation. And I really wanted the words of Truman Capote to tell a story. And what happened is that another Capote film was made in the interim, okay? And so my producer had said to me, why don't you add Tennessee Williams in? And so what happened was that it just became this kind of incredible tete-a-tete between the two of them. And I really wanted them because here you had two of the most important literary voices of the 20th century. And they had so many things in common. And I really wanted to redefine them for not only the younger generation, but to show a new story to the people who are really familiar with their work. And what I tried to do with the film was, it's not a biopic in any way. It's almost like the audience are just overhearing a conversation between the two of them. But the conversation is talking about their whole creative process. It's talking about their mad desire to write, their childhood, their sad childhood, having the lack of love and support, being the children of addicts, being then becoming alcoholics themselves, both being homosexual, people not understanding them, suffering from depression. And what we did was we created a story and a conversation between the two of them. And we tried to just bring that and show an intimacy between the two of them, but we also want to create that intimacy for an audience. And I think we were able to do that. And it's quite, you really feel like you're just eavesdropping in on these two great voices while they're, having a drink, unfortunately. They're still having a drink.
And you mentioned the talk shows and David Frost, the kind of intimacy that you don't get anymore in talk shows. People have like 12 minutes and you're in and out, and nobody asks you what they think about love. And so there's this different kind of intimacy, when the two of them are sort of at their peak, just in general.
Well, there is, and I think that David Frost had, he was also his body language was so different than what happens today, because he was leaning in, he was touching. You know, there's something, and there was a conversation with gravitas, and that just doesn't happen right now. And that really, and we were very fortunate to have those two interviews, because those really were, they were just the base of the film, especially in the beginning. And we just used that as a launching pad to be able to go in any direction we wanted to. And it really gave us a freedom. But because of the way we did it, and the fact that we had Jim Parsons play Truman Capote and Zach Quinto play Tennessee Williams, and we had these great actors involved, we really could allow all of the words that I had kind of done throughout my research and in my archival research. We could have them say whatever we wanted to. So it gave us as filmmakers so much freedom, because we didn't have to abide by any chronological direction of the film. And we could just bring up these subjects, and we brought them up in a very, very organic way. So it really, for us internally, we had so much fun making the film, because we felt we just had so much freedom to do what we wanted.
Yeah, that's great. It shows you obviously loved both of them, and that comes through. And Marilyn and Ellen, I'd love to hear how you chose Sesame Street. Like, why wouldn't you first? But how you chose Sesame Street to go to look at.
For me, Sesame Street wasn't a particular force in my childhood. And when I got introduced to this project through Trevor, Ellen's husband, I became instantly enamored of the subject matter, and not from being a super fan, but because I come from an immigrant background. I was born in Cuba, and I somehow am continually drawn to multicultural themes and social justice themes. And surprisingly, shockingly, actually, this show that was developed for preschoolers had this in spades. And this is what seduced me to this project, was the fact that this cultural icon that is Sesame Street was born of the civil rights movement. And it was the human struggle and the human component of the people behind this show that really attracted me. And it was the era of the turmoil that was happening in this country, when so many people were being awakened to issues of race, issues of equality, issues of inner city life. And actually, it's interesting that we're on a panel with you, Lisa, with your film about Truman Capote, because our film and your film also encapsulate a certain time, and a certain time in a big way in New York. And one of the characters in Street Gang is Christopher Cerf, who is the son of Bennett Cerf, who was Truman Capote's publisher. And so, Chris is just one example of many of people that were at the top of their game as artists, writers, entertainers, performers, educators, coming together to create this spectacular work of art. So these are the elements really that drew me to the show, quite adult themes, and not so much the fact that it was a show for children.
And that's where Marilyn and I were very similar in our intent around this. I was drawn to the project. Trevor is my producing partner, and also my spouse. We could do a whole panel about that, but in working together. But, he had originally, we were talking about doing this project. Our company's Macrocosm, and our tagline is building worlds. And so we create original IP or around world building or getting to know worlds that have been created by others and understanding them better, in the creative sphere. So, we had been led to this book, which is Street Gang, by Michael Davis, New York Times bestseller. And Trevor read it, and we both were Sesame Street kids growing up. There's a lot of us, 52 seasons, I think, this year. But in that, Trevor had read the book, and he said, I want you to read this, because I learned something that I learned a lot of things that I hadn't learned before in reading the book. And so I read it, and I was so drawn to the story that I didn't really know, which was that, here's Sesame Street. It is an institution, but it wasn't always that way. It started out by a group of, as Marilyn always likes to say, rebels who came together with a common purpose, which was using the power of television to address a social problem, which was, an inequality in access to education for children of color living in the cities. And I said, I'm in. Based on that, I want to talk about that because I think it is so critically important. And we know that we have many parallels, in our society today ongoing, but that this show came together with the intent to do that, and that it ended up changing children's television and so many other things along the way. We wanted to go back to that original gang that made it happen. And I thought that would be an incredibly interesting story to tell.
Well, and it is, and I was a child of Sesame Street, being in my early 50s. I remember growing up with it, but I'm also, a nice white child from the suburbs who, the film brought so much nostalgia to me, but I also learned so much about what it was that I didn't catch any of it when I was young. And I wonder, the producers of the film or the show had so much intention, but I'm curious how much sort of that intention bled over into changing an entire generation without them knowing it. In the way that it's like, as growing up, I saw Jesse Jackson on Sesame Street, but I didn't know who Jesse Jackson was, and what did that do to me as a child?
It is sort of like what Chris Surf says in the film. He says, we didn't know we were changing the world. They were really, it was quite an experiment for them. They were taking these very sophisticated writers who were writing humor that was making big social commentary and biting satire. And they were writing little segments that were going to attract adults and kids. Why? Because it was a better way to teach, and also because they wanted to write things that would entertain them. The entire thing was such an experiment that I think the intent was to profoundly affect education and profoundly affect children who were disadvantaged, but the end result was so much more than they could have imagined. I mean, there was really no sector of children in America that were not watching Sesame Street. So It was very difficult to measure how it affected kids that watched versus those that didn't. Everyone watched. But interestingly, the target audience was Black inner city kids. That was who they really cared about reaching. And it just reached everyone.
And, when you talk about what their intent was, Beth, there was so much intentionality about the show, and I think that's the other part that I found so incredibly interesting. We talk about things like community organizing today and making sure that what you're creating, is in the voice and serves the people that you're creating it for. And that's what they did. They did community organizing. They hired community organizers to ensure that the programming and that they were developing was what their community actually wanted and served them. And that to me was revolutionary, and it was intentional, and it's still how they do it today. So I thought, we talk about it now, that's what they did then.
Yeah. I mean, there's this interesting sense of responsibility that art and artists have to absorb, and in this case, television producers absorb as the artist, and being so sort of on the edge, on the cutting edge of race equity and social justice discussions that we're having now. It's fascinating that the intention was there and they just didn't know how much, like the scope of what it was. And I think very similarly with both Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams, they were on the edge of sort of LGBTQ rights. And, as out gay men, who were lauded for their arts and not, obviously they didn't have easy lives, but they were always out. Like they bore this life that many people hid in those days.
They did, and Tennessee was a little later. He came out a little later because he actually did try to. He did have a girlfriend, okay, but Truman at a very young age, did come out, and I think that especially Tennessee really was so kind of clear and concise about his feelings, and it's something that he wrote about a lot in his journals, and he wore his heart on his sleeve, and he was in love, out of love, and it was a very important part of his being. And of course, that's what he showed on stage, because that's a great legacy of his work, because he really he allowed people to talk about their true feelings on stage. And with Capote, it's all a little bit trickier, because Capote was always on the make. There was something from a young age that he had developed kind of this type of veneer to himself that was important, and even his emotional life was not in the forefront as much as it was for Tennessee, but they were certainly out, and they were out also in a very international way, because they had this kind of very vibrant expat life, and their life was it was a small circle of people. They may not have been in Tangier at the same time, but if they were in Tangier, they were there with Paul Bowles and Jane Bowles, and it was, but this was, they were very, very open about being gay, and it was really important. It really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at a time that many people weren't, and the rights just simply were not there.
No, they were definitely
even now in many places in the world, the rights are just not there.
No, and but it was not accepted also by their family. I mean, that's the other thing. And Truman's mother certainly said, well, maybe you should go to the doctor. Okay, I mean, it's not something that was going to get fixed by the doctor. And Tennessee's father never accepted him. But that's they believed in themselves and believed in their life, and so that's what they decided to do.
Yeah, I would love, Lisa, to hear a little bit about how you chose to have Jim Parsons and Zach Quinto be the voices. I mean, it's an excellent choice, and it really lent a lot of depth. But to have all of the story be told contemporaneously with the happening, as opposed to someone currently looking back.
I know. Well, it's I think I'm incorporating the idea of actors working in films that I've been making for the past couple of years. And I think that what it does for me is that it allows me to use a lot more archival material. It allows me to use writing. In the case of In Love, Cecil, for Cecil Beaton, he had published 35 books in his lifetime. And so and he was a beautiful writer amongst his many other talents. And so I had asked Rupert Everett to be the voice of Beaton, and it really worked beautifully. And in the case of Truman and Tennessee, it was very clear to me that I did not want talking heads, and because I wanted their words to resonate, and I wanted to use their words, because I think that there are plenty of archival interviews of both of them, but I also did not want it to be told by just archive of interviewers asking them. It was a combination between Dick Cavett or even David Frost, but I really wanted them to tell their own story. And there's so much beautiful material in all of these archives it just happened very naturally for me in the research. And of course the dream was to be able to have Jim and Zach do it, but it happened to work. Okay, I knew that Zach was a huge Tennessee Williams fan. And he had performed him on Broadway, and I also knew that Jim was a huge fan of both of them, of both Truman and Tennessee. And of course, you wish for the stars, and sometimes I think COVID helped, unfortunately, because they had some downtime, but they're just incredibly supportive, and they were right for it, and it was also right to have two gay men represent them. It was it felt right, and they were really passionate about it, and I've been very touched by their support in the film, and I think it's a different medium for these actors to be able to do something like a documentary. And I think a lot of actors are doing it more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to
No,
say,
I think
Lisa, I love that element in your film. I just thought the way that the actors, they wove in with the archival interviews and it was just beautifully done. It was very lyrical. I felt the pacing overall was just such a lovely, languid pace. Then you were struck by some real intense moments of revelation from each of these creative forces. It was it was just a really wonderful way to do it, and it was it was a lovely journey to be on. So congratulations on that.
Well, no, thank you, because I felt that it should be a journey, and that's what I felt, and I felt that it should be like a dream, and that we're kind of going with these voices, and they're saying things that are so painful. There are times that they're really, they're being so painfully honest about certain things, and we had a very clear idea how we wanted to shoot it. We wanted to use archival material and all these different things, and we just did it, and it was just it's a little bit it is literally like the two of them in having a conversation, which is what we were really trying to do.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to structure, and thank you for saying that representation matters, and it was important to use gay actors to represent both Capote and Williams, and because it's absolutely true, representation does matter, and who tells what story really does matter. Structurally, I know Ellen and Marilyn, your film is based on the book by Michael Davis. Can you tell us a little bit about, did you use his basic structure and build out the visuals, or was it more of a launching pad to sort of look at Sesame Street?
Really, the book was the inspiration, and what we're dealing with is a historical chronicle of this program. But for me, I read the book and then I put it down, and it was from that point on a reference point if I needed to confirm something or needed to check on something. But it really took off once we started exploring these characters. It was all in the people, and this is what I love about documentaries. Like Lisa's film, to me, is a beautiful meditation on art and creativity and self-identity. And some documentaries are verite, and some are historical and archival. And but one of my favorite quotes about documentaries, I think it was from the Maisels brothers, and it was something like, a documentary is 90% empathy and 10% optical illusion. And this is what a documentary does. It makes you understand a cultural moment or an event through the people that lived it. And for me, getting back to the structure of the movie, it really just launched from one character to the next, and it was really about the struggle, the sacrifices, and the goals that they all had, and how this all blended together. As I said earlier, I wasn't a big Sesame Street kid. I also have, in my previous documentary, Mad Hot Ballroom, people always used to say to me, "Oh, you must love dance." No, I don't love dance particularly, but it's the inner journey of the characters that really, for me, propels everything.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, because I really appreciated the hindsight that came from the present day interviewees being able to look back at what they did in the past and see what revolutionary work they had done, but might not have seemed that at the time. Do you think your interviewees were sort of discovering during the course of that interview just what kind of revolutionary work they were doing because they had to recount it and sort of relive it?
One thing that I felt with every single one of them was it was clearly going back to something that was almost the most wonderful period of their lives. Because it you know, most of the things we recount in this film are 50 years in the past. And a lot of these people were being asked to go into their memories in very specific ways, and how they're being asked about other people that were working with them. And I think going back to that, especially in the era that we're in now, the world has almost come back as in a cycle to that same point. You know, we had the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement and all of these things. All of these issues were touched on by them so long ago in a more innocent way, but also in a way that was more expressive than I think television is today. Again, similarly to those David Frost interviews, you would never hear questions like this. And in children's television in particular, you would never have this kind of sophisticated exploration of society. So I think everyone, in remembering what they did, it was sort of a revelation of how revolutionary it really was.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we're so incredibly fortunate in this film to have gotten to talk to the people that we did, and that so many of them are still with us. You know, we lost, and we this film was a long journey. You know, we spent several years on it, and during the time of our filming, Sesame Street was celebrating its 50th anniversary. So we were having people reflect at a time in their lives where they were, you know, really looking back, you know, from that period of end of life. And you're looking back on what you created and what does that mean? What is and I think that's a really beautiful and important moment for, you know, for people, is to be able to take that accounting of ourselves and to see what it meant, not only to ourselves, but to others, you know. And the other thing that I think really crystallized for us in this film, you know, you mentioned about Michael's book. It's a very big book, and it is a very extensive in the history of the show. And very early on, from our initial, you know, conversations about what we wanted to talk about, you know, the stories of Joan Gans Cooney, you know, John Stone and Jim Henson. It was really about these three pillars, as Marilyn liked to call them, that were the sort of the base where we built the rest of the gang. But it was so clear to us that to get the message that we wanted about creativity and being inspired to stand up and use creativity to make change, it was really, we had to focus on the origin story. And we really had to focus on that very turbulent time in our society where this happened, where people were really asked to answer a call. You know, it was, where were you going to stand in history in 1968? You know, were you going to do something with what you saw was so obviously broken and wrong? And how interesting this choice was of how they did it. And I think, again, to what Marilyn was saying, you know, we're that time for us all to stand up and do something never ended. That is a thing that, you know, needed to continue, but particularly as we were finishing this film, you know, through COVID, through everything that happened in this past year, it's just so incredibly relevant for all of us to ask ourselves, where do you stand? What step are you going to take when you see something that you know needs to change, and that's bigger than yourself, you know? And so that, I think, was a really interesting part as we were finishing this documentary and putting it all together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the lessons that we were being taught.
Yeah, Marilyn, how long did it take you to do the film?
Well, we started counting when we first started shooting. I think we started shooting in 2016.
When, 2016?
Yes, Yes.
I joke, I say
Those-
1865.
Oh,
And, you
Well,
know,
that actually, oh, sorry, go ahead, Marilyn.
no. You know, the world of documentaries can be a bumpy road. We went down for a little bit, and then we came back up and jumped back in with the original shooting and the interviews. And then, you know, the gathering of the archival was quite a process. And
Sure.
it's so satisfying. I know everyone here appreciates the amazing joy of finding that one piece of footage that is rarely seen or maybe never been seen before, and just encapsulates the moment in such a beautiful way. And so there was a lot of that. John Stone, who was the original director and the brainchild of much of what is Sesame Street, watched a public service announcement on television in 1968. And it was called Send Your Kid to the Ghetto. And it was shot on location on the streets of Harlem. And it was a piece about what kids in the ghetto, what life really is like in the ghetto. And he saw that and he said, this is what this program needs to be. We're going to set it in the ghetto. And that became the whole basis for the setting of the show. Well, it took us 9 months, I think, to track down this public service announcement. But that morning when our amazing archival producer, Rich Remsburg, called us and said, I found it, you know, these are the joys of recreating something like this.
But I think that's also the challenge, and I'm sure, Lisa, you felt this way as well. I mean, we're talking about well-known, very, you know, in our zeitgeist. I mean, these are cultural, you know, the show is a cultural icon, obviously Tennessee Williams, you know, Truman Capote. How do you serve that up in a way that is interesting and different to the audience, you know? And for us, it was, you know, going deep with archival and ensuring that we were finding things. We found things that the workshop hadn't seen in 50 years, you know, thank you, Rich, you know, but it was really about, you know, trying to find that. And again, being true to that moment in time around origin and creation. And I think one of the greatest compliments that we had this lovely moment, you know, back in January, where we were all on a Zoom with our interview subjects, and you know, they had all seen the film for the first time, and they all said to us that we captured the moment, that essence of being together, to being that working, you know, day and night, and creating and having been part of something that was a bigger purpose than yourself. And that to us was the biggest compliment we could ever get in the entire world. You know, the rest of it is all gravy. But you know, that's as a documentary filmmaker, you want to capture that essence of the people that you are trying to tell their story. And if you're doing that correctly, then that's everything.
I think I think you're right. And I think there's this whole sense of like the feeling of authenticity when you're telling these stories, because you're given the right to tell the story. And so you want to be really authentic in everything, everywhere you approach it. And I think I've been thinking a lot about the sense of how people are different storytellers, because, you know, we, Marilyn, both you and I, and even Ellen, we would all approach telling a story in a very different way. And it's really interesting to see what we all can do with archival material, our words, books, and it's really, it's actually nice, and documentary does give you that freedom to do that. And I think it's not only it's a freedom, but it's this kind of flexibility. And you know, you're also dealing with a legacy that is still a legacy that's very alive today. Okay, you know, I've been dealing with a lot of subjects who are gone. And so I'm dealing with estates, and I'm not dealing with estates that have to actually approve a final cut in any way. They don't have to prove any cut, but I tend to work with estates very early on, because I just think that, you know, they should be kind of part of the whole process. And, you know, and they should just, if they have something to tell me and they say, you know, we would really love it if you maybe didn't touch upon this or touch upon that, but they never do. And I mean, thankfully, people do trust me. But it's really, I mean, we have been given, I feel fortunate that we've been allowed to tell these stories. I mean, even if the stories kind of are coming to us and, in different ways, but, we have to be as authentic as we can be to tell it. And if you're able to capture the zeitgeist of that moment, that's the best thing you can do. And it seems like, I mean, you obviously did that, which is nice. And it's very rewarding when you hear it from all the people who were involved in the show. I mean, it must have been such a great feeling. I didn't grow up in America, so I missed Sesame Street. I mean, of course I knew it, but it was not part of my childhood. But, we all know what Sesame Street was. It was amazing.
I mean,
when you were working with those estates and finding, did you find materials that they didn't even know that they had?
I do sometimes. I do. I mean, but I've dealt with pretty high profile people,
Yeah.
and so when there's most of the people. I mean, I've definitely, each time I find something, but I can't say that I found that one, like I didn't find answered prayers. Okay. I did not find the rest of answered prayers. I didn't even look, actually, because it was not part of my story. But it's not like I found in a box. There was a case when in the Peggy Guggenheim, when the writer, we had optioned a book, and Jackie couldn't find the tapes, and she had done with the final interviews of Peggy Guggenheim. She couldn't find the tapes. And I went through her whole apartment. And then I finally said, "Do you have a basement?" And I found them all in her basement. So so yes, there are times I've done that, but I always like to have something there to show and to share. And it's always, if it's some kind of something special, a surprise, if it's from photographs or footage, there's always something. And there's something in Truman, Tennessee, and there's some beautiful photography that's never been seen before. So it's, it's, I think the chase is always very exciting. And when you then find it, it's just the best.
We had a lot of that. I mean, that was honestly, that was, I think, was a big surprise, right, Marilyn? I mean, because again, you think that so much is known, and then to be able to find things that, like I said, the folks at Sesame Workshop hadn't seen, or that some of our cast hadn't seen in a very long time. I mean, that was really very rewarding and fun. I mean, yeah, that is the fun, right? I think it's why we get into it. It's the way that you tell your story in a unique way. And again, we can't give enough kudos to our archival producer, Rich Remsburg, and our assistant archival producer, Ruby Nitzberg. I mean, they were tireless. And Marilyn would say, "Could you find this?" And they did, and it was great.
Also, even if certain things are not used, because we have so much that didn't make it into the film, but to go into someone's box that has been sitting in a closet for 40 years or 50 years, and to find personal sketches and to find doodles and written notes, just gives you such insight and such I don't know, it gives you such an intimate knowledge of that person, which really informs what you put on the screen. So
it gives you the flavor, doesn't it, Marilyn? It gives you the flavor of it, of the time, and it's
really
how does
something.
Yeah, does it change the direction of the story that you were planning on when you discover a piece like that? Can you like take a hard right?
Well, I'll give you an example. For me, the character of John Stone was very, very important. When people think of the creation of Sesame Street, people invariably credit Jim Henson with the creation of it, because that's what everyone assumes. He's the Muppet guy and it's about Jim Henson. But it was really John Stone that was at the center of so much. And very little is known about him. So it was a big goal to really honor him and reveal what he contributed to this cultural icon that is Sesame Street. But in all of that, a lot of discoveries were made. John Stone suffered from depression. He was, maybe today he would be classified as a bipolar personality. And many times, as we all know, these people are geniuses, but they're also difficult, and they're also very sensitive, and they're also hard to deal with in the moment. And so having discovered these elements about John's life just gave more texture to the film, to not veer away from the overall story, but to, you know, the goal of this movie is not to recap Sesame Street and make it a love fest, but rather to go underneath the surface and really understand, you know, these very complicated people that were a part of it. So in some ways, these kinds of discoveries do take you, I think, into more interesting terrain than you originally thought you were going to be in.
Sure.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions here from our audience. The first one, do you know if the Simpsons creators were influenced by Sesame Street at all? Very different in tone and not overtly educational, but another children's show that works for adults, perhaps more than for kids.
Know that, but
I
I
have
do
no
know it's
idea.
interesting. There is you know, that's interesting. I mean, I guess if you grew up with it, right, you're influenced in some way. But you know, there is a children's show on television right now. It's called Storybots, and it is actually, the creators of that show have said that they were directly influenced by Sesame Street and very much tried to model their show on that with the same intentionality. But we don't know about the Simpsons. Sorry.
I actually
fair.
feel like The Simpsons is an adult show completely,
I do too.
That you can show your children, can show your children.
sort of.
I think the child has to be a certain age, because it gets a little crazy, The Simpsons. I never watched it, but it's got some, it's a little crazy at times. It's not
Yeah.
for little kids.
No.
No, definitely not. And then David asked, I grew up in theater. I saw The Glass Menagerie with Kate Hepburn through a student package that included plays on films. How did you choose the clips you used?
Oh, you know, the clips, because it was interesting. We thought that the clips visually would be much more powerful to use, and we really used so many different films. And, you know, it's really just based upon, you know, The Glass Menagerie, because we were really talking about, this is when he was really putting his inner self on stage. Tennessee was putting his inner, we had very, very specific reasons for each one. You know, that in A Streetcar Named Desire, I mean, you know, like Marlon Brando is just kind of, he's there, he's wearing his, we felt like we had to use where he looked the sexiest with his t-shirt, and he, you know, was taking his shirt off, and so that was really kind of overtly sexual, okay. And we wanted to do that, but it's always a little bit in the dialogue. It's something in the dialogue that we're using as a transition, and it's not like we're trying to use the most famous scenes at all. But it's always a dialogue transition, and we really feel fortunate when we can use films like this. And a lot of people haven't seen these Tennessee. I mean, there's a whole new generation of kids who have not seen any of these films. And what's really nice is that it does create an interest for people to go and watch that. And the theater pieces are very hard to use, because it's hard to actually get usage on theater pieces. And working with the Lincoln Center, I don't know, Marilyn, if you've had luck with trying to get things out of the Lincoln Center, out of the archive there, but very difficult. So, and the movies have, you know, a lot of good stars in them as well.
I thought those movie choices were wonderful, actually.
Yeah, I love working with film, because I do a lot in my work, and a lot of it, you know, also the commercial work. And I just, listen, how lucky were we to have all of them? I mean, we really were very fortunate.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Well,
I'm
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
Beth.
No, go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead.
No, but I was just going to say, and I was thinking about in your film, Lisa, where Tennessee Williams says that he actually doesn't, you know, he doesn't want people to remember his films, right? The movie, his plays, his films. I thought that was so interesting, because he's 100% right. That is what lives, you know. I thought that was just a very interesting comment.
Yeah. And that answers the question that's in the chat about movie clips versus theater clips. But I didn't realize that it was much harder to get usage rights for theater than it is perhaps for film.
You know, it is, because I mean, I think that if you, first of all, if you really want to get it, you want to try to get the original, you want to get the best one. Okay. And
Right.
first of all, a lot of those things were not filmed originally. So that's the first thing. But it's quite hard to get them, to get the usage out of them. And for some reason, the films are much easier to use. And, you know, you do, just as Tennessee Williams said, he had to leave the theater 10 minutes early, so he wouldn't see the ending. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but, you know, he had a lot of movies that were based on his plays. You know, he was really successful.
Well, his plays are they're so visual. They're so evocative. His words are so evocative. You know, they almost feel, I mean, they're definitely theater pieces, but they translate over so easily, I think.
They do. And well, because he's talking about feelings, and he's putting something on stage and in film that wasn't the typical subject. And it's just people that are full of passion at all times. And, you know, we see that a lot more now, but it's a true feelings, which was so important.
Yeah. We kind of touched a little bit on it earlier about this sense of time and place, especially like New York in the late 60s and 70s. And, you know, all three of these icons really evoke that. Do you think that they could have come at a different time, or were they always sort of destined to emerge out of sort of what was going on in the 60s and 70s?
I don't know. I guess I'll answer first.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess, you know, Tennessee really in later 60s and 70s was really not that much. He wasn't that much of a New Yorker at that point. And his success, you know, the 60s is when he was really in trouble. And this is when he and Capote were both, you know, also they were going to get Dr. Feelgood. They were really, were really in a downward path. And, but with Capote and the other side of it, the 70s really marked the age of celebrity for him. Okay. Because after In Cold Blood, he went all the way up, but then he started to just go down a little bit. But this was really, you know, he entered the celebrity world and really became something that he couldn't even control himself anymore. And so it was a very dangerous path for both of them. And I think what was really sad during those years was that Truman wasn't ever really able to write. I mean, it's unclear what he did after In Cold Blood. He did publish music for Chameleons. He did write, you know, he wrote answered prayers or certain chapters. But then there was nothing after that, absolutely nothing. While somebody like Tennessee Williams actually in that time continued to create, okay? And even though it was a horrible time for him professionally, he needed to write. And, but, you know, New York was not, you know, he did not love the idea of celebrity. You know, he did not embrace it the way that Capote did. And so, you know, for him, he really tries to stay. This is when he was down in Florida and Key West. And I mean, he really avoided New York at that point.
Yeah. And then Sesame Street, you know, it is such a reflection of its time and place, while yet being also transferable to many different communities across the United States.
I think that especially initially, now Sesame Street is not so much a reflection of New York as it once was. But to me, that period of the 60s in New York was such fertile ground, because it was a city in crisis in some ways. You know, there had been all this flight to the suburbs, and so who was in the city? Low-income people, rich people, some, you know, a lot of artists, and a lot of you know, the abstract expressionists were still around. You had people that were living here cheaply because they could as artists, and this doesn't exist today. So I feel like all these social forces that took root in New York were very powerful then. And I don't know that that I feel like it was the perfect fertile moment for something like Sesame Street and so many other things to take root. Today, New York is, you know, well, New York's been taken over by Wall Street, by the real estate moguls. It's not quite this, I don't know, this amazing creative space that it once was, I think.
I agree with you, Marilyn. I think I totally agree with that. I don't think it's not, ideas are not coming from New York. It doesn't have that kind of, that energy. And it has nothing to do with what's gone on in the past year. I mean, I think this has been going on for some time.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite, I don't know, I hope it's gonna get it back, but I'm not sure if it will, because it's been gone for some time now.
It hurts me to say these words. I love this place so much, and I believe in it so much, and I love to tell stories about it. And I don't know, we'll see what happens.
I mean, anything's possible at this point, as you know, as the world starts to figure out what we want to do with the future. And I'm curious, you know, especially over the last year, what effect the pandemic and COVID have had, because, you know, you're all still working on your films when the pandemic shut everything down. And I'm wondering if that had an effect on you know, on the final edits, on any directions, if there was any, you know, films about connection they're so challenged by this time right now. So I'm curious, did it affect you?
You know, I'll speak for myself. You know, yes, you know, we were just heading into post. You know, we were closing down our production office in New York in Hell's Kitchen in the end of 2019, and you know, our crew, our amazing gang was all from New York. You know, except Trevor and myself were in LA, and what we had thought would just be a very robust, still engaging period where we would get together, you know, in doing post, it just, you know, the world shifted and changed. And so, and you're right, film is very much it's an intimate experience with people that you're building the story with. And we had that. We have an amazing crew of talented people that we were so fortunate to work with. And, you know, we had a lot of things that shifted. You know, we thought we were going in a certain direction with the film, with certain people, and that ended. You know, that was, you know, the world, you know, things all changed. And so we had to, it was, but, you know, and so editing and in your living room or your bedroom and doing, you know, color correction and sound, and you know, there's a lot of purchasing of extra long Ethernet cables to the one outlet that you have in your home that you can actually get a good line to, you know, to be able to render things. I mean, it's a lot, you know, but I will say, you know, for us, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we were able to finish this film in these boxes of solitude and kind of come back together in these boxes on a Zoom screen to talk and to finish, and incredibly proud of what actually came out of that. But it was not easy, and we are so looking forward to the time where we can all be together again and actually watch this film together and have that shared experience, because we deserve it. It's been a long run.
Well said, Ellen.
Yep.
Luckily, all of our shooting had been complete,
Yeah.
and we were well on our way with the edit and all of those things. But yeah, I mean, the world shifted on its axis. I mean, in every way for everyone, in every creative endeavor and every endeavor I can think of. So we're all pretty fortunate to be where we are at this moment, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we had already a locked cut, so we were far along, and you know, I had to work on color correction, but we were very well down the path. So we didn't have that many issues with it. But as I was saying before we all came on, I really miss the film festival circuit this time. I mean, it's really nice to be able to do this, but there's nothing like presenting it because since I'm very kind of outside of the film business, I really enjoy having a conversation with the audience after screenings. And that's the one thing that I've missed with this film. And there's a lot to talk about, especially in Truman, Tennessee, but that's all right. It'll be, it's at least, I feel lucky we can do it this way at least.
Yeah, it's that shared experience that we're all missing, but we'll get there. The light, like I like to say, 6 months ago, we couldn't even see that there was a tunnel to have a light in front of, but now I feel like we're in the tunnel and we can see the light. We just have to stay in the tunnel for a little bit longer until we can get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's getting back into cinemas like the Egyptian and to see movies on the big screen with other people and have those shared experiences, because that's where the emotion comes from.
Sure.
Yes.
And as we said in the beginning too, before this started, Beth, we're just so grateful to Seattle Film Festival for making this happen. Again, you all are pulling these things together in very challenging times and coming up with ways to engage audiences. And as filmmakers, we so appreciate having this forum and you putting this festival together in this amazing slate of films that is for audiences. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This is why we all do what we do. You all make amazing films. We show amazing films. The audience is there. It's all great. So you both have releases for your films planned for the spring, or we're in the spring, for the summer and fall. Lisa, I know your release is in the summer. Yes.
It's in the summer.
Yep. And it's with Greenwich.
It's
Kino
with
Lorber.
It's with Kino Lorber.
Kino Lorber.
And it's releasing in the UK, I think next week or the week after, with Dogwolf.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And then Ellen and Marilyn,
That's great.
Street Gang comes out
April 23rd in theaters. That's amazing to say. Oh, we're so excited. Go where it's safe and everyone is following proper health protocols that they feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
But yes, April 23rd, Screen Media, Chicken Soup for the Soul Company is our theatrical distributor. And May 7th, premium on demand in both US and Canada. So we're very excited. That's
really fantastic. And so if people want to keep up on what's going on with the films, do you have a website, social media, Ellen?
Yes. Yeah. Always the producer. Yes. So our social handle is @StreetGangMovie. And on all social platforms. And we also have a website, which is streetgangmovie.com. So you can get all the information there.
Great. And Lisa?
God, you're so much more organized, Ellen, than I am. It's @Truman in Tennessee, and we do not have a website. Okay. We're very
we'll talk, Lisa.
Not that organized. Okay.
Well, I know that the Kino Lorber website will list everywhere the virtual cinema is opening, and I know SIFF Cinema, virtual SIFF Cinema, will be opening it this summer with Kino Lorber. And so they'll be able to list where people can. Oh, good. Dustin's throwing all of that in the chat, which is fantastic. So people can just
Dustin.
copy it and paste
Thank
it.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all for spending the last hour with me talking about your amazing films and for making these incredible pieces of art. I know that they'll be part of repertoires for decades to come in terms of documentary filmmaking. So thank you, Lisa, Ellen, Marilyn. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
A pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy your evening.
Okay. Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.